Good evening. We're going to get started on the Plain Sustainability July 22nd meeting. Tonight we have order of business, introduction of 2 new commissioners. That'll be fun. Consent agenda, meeting minutes from 6/24, the PSC meeting. And then after that, we have the comprehensive plan overview and policies, a briefing by Eric Engstrom, and then we're done. So quick.
10 minutes. 15 at the outside, if you really drag it out.
Order of business, items of interest from the commissioners. First, it is really my pleasure to introduce 2 new commissioners to the Plain Sustainability Commission. This gets us up to full capacity. First is Teresa St. Martin and Maggie Talmadge. I'm going to ask them to say a few words about themselves, and then we'll ask for other items of interest from the commission.
Hi, I'm thrilled to be joining you on the commission. I'm a residential real estate agent here in the Portland metro area. I have a background in green building and can you hear me? Okay, is that better? Ooh, very loud. So I also am familiar with zoning and also how people live in our city. So I think I'll be able to add something there. I have a background in technology. I have an MS in technology management from Pepperdine and spent quite a bit of time in medical technology before I switched to real estate.
Good. Okay, my turn. I'm Maggie Talmadge. I currently work at a nonprofit called Eco Districts. I've been active with the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. I presented and lobbied on the floor during when the Sustainable Development Goals were being negotiated. I've also done quite a bit of work in the community with NEA and Verde, especially with regard to housing and residential affordability. And I'm a graduate from Wellesley College outside of Boston, went to high school outside of Eugene. So I'm bringing a few different perspectives, and I'm really thrilled to be on this commission and working through these documents and planning. So.
And if you didn't notice, Maggie is our student representative fulfilling that commitment out of the Portland plan. So she has the task of coming back, 30 years from now when with Howard here still here to talk about the comp plan and what we were thinking about when we passed this, hopefully here in the spring. Items of interest, other interests from the commissioners? Kat.
Just wanted to let you all know that I've volunteered more of my time. So I'm going to join the short-term rental multifamily unit work group with the mayor's office to kind of work through the issues that seem to be outstanding for city council. And I think our first meeting is this week on Thursday. And I'm also sitting on the Urban Renewal Area Amendment, or Urban Renewal Area Amendments Subcommittee. I'm trying to remember what they call it, with PDC. Had a couple meetings there, and they're looking at how they're redrawing the urban renewal area boundaries. And then last night, we just wrapped up the West Quadrant Stakeholders Advisory Committee. It was a great process. Staff did an amazing job. We had, I would say, general consensus. We've encouraged those with some strong views on, kind of minority report issues to please go ahead and include a letter with our recommendation to lay those out. And I know that they'll be bringing those issues forward to this commission when they come forward. And I don't know, is that in August, Susan? Something like that.
The first time here.
Can you give a quick summary of what those issues are?
So there's been a fair amount of discussion on the West End and whether or not height should be increased or perhaps even decreased from what is allowed in today's code. The group certainly did not recommend any decrease, and I'm trying to remember the exact boundaries now. This is horrible, whether we increase some of the areas within the West End. But in general, there seems to be a fairly there's a group of people that kind of have what I would say is flat cities, philosophical view, and don't want to see heights increased within Portland. And I think some of the groups in the West End feel that that's an appropriate area to kind of maybe look at not changing heights or increasing heights due to what's been built there currently. Also, a lot of people looking to have historical resources inventory done within their districts, and really last night in general, we're just like, it kind of seems like, we kind of turn back to staff, it needs to be done citywide. We realized that staff's just trying to prioritize per district, and that makes a lot of sense. Some districts have a lot more resources than others. There's no point in doing South Waterfront quite yet. So we kind of get where staff was going with that, but it does seem like maybe an inventory needs to be done citywide. Old Town Chinatown, Skidmore District, there's just been a lot of kind of discussions about how to spur development on with the surface parking lots. And again, with those historic resources, does it make sense to look at some height changes in those districts, maybe more design guidelines? That's another one. West End's kind of looking at maybe they would kind of liking to have some more specific design guidelines for their area as well as Skidmore. So in general, I think that's kind of it in a nutshell as far as the issues that they're covered within the plan or the recommendations of most of those to just kind of get continued study. It's not saying it has to be one way or the other as much as there needs to be more work done to kind of determine what the sweet spot is, I'd say, which seems fair.
Thanks.
Yep.
Oh, I just want to observe, Kat, how good it is for us to be working in conjunction with PDC. And the more we can do that, the better. So I'm very happy to see this begin. I hope we can do more of it over time. Really be working on a kind of a same level around things and the issues we were talking about. It's a good thing. Thank you.
Well, I'll let the rest of you know when they reach out again.
Other items? One thing I'd like to do is go around the room right now, and Kat identified the committee she's on, but other commissioners, if you're on other committees, so we can refresh a list of committees you're on, and the new commissioners, that means that there's opportunity for you to volunteer for some committees that may be upcoming. Gary, you want to start? Are you on any committees at this point?
In terms of committees related to
Yeah.
PSC, I'm not active in anything right now.
We'll write that down.
Michelle?
The Design Review Advisory Committee.
I serve on the streetcar board, but that's not representing the PSC particularly. I don't think there are any active assignments right now for me as a commissioner.
Wow, it's hard to believe.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm forgetting one.
You're there, you're just not on committees.
You got others?
I think that covers it.
She couldn't-
Climate Action Plan update?
I'm on a committee that has remarkable opportunities for new commissioners, and in fact, sitting commissioners. The Citizen Advisory, it says CIC, what is the? Citizen Involvement Committee, which is mandated actually by the state to exist. It's a citizen panel, wonderful group of people, and I chair that committee, have for a number of years, and I think I'm ready to move on, Deborah. So would love to find somebody that would take my place or at least join me on that committee. So if you're interested, it's a Citizen Involvement Committee that really reports back to this group around what they hear and what they feel in their neighborhoods and in their environments.
I'm on the Port Strategic Direction Committee. The port's looking at strategic direction for the port in the next 20 years. Port of Portland, that is. Karen?
I'm on East Portland Action Plan Committee and their Technical Advisory Committee. I'm on the New Ending Homeless Coordinating Council, which is a coordinating council being brought together through the county and the city. Haven't had their first meeting yet, but I'm excited about being asked to be part of that. PDX-CAC, Community Advisory Committee, and also the Social Equity Subcommittee of the CAC.
And Andre, I did remember, along with Mike, I'm on the Climate Action Plan Committee, but we only have one meeting left, so I'll be available soon.
Thank you.
One other thing I wanted to mention of interest is on August 2nd, there's a Chinatown community cleanup. So it'd be really nice for people to show up there and lend their support to that part of the city.
Great. Other items? Susan?
No director's report. I will save some time here.
Oh, okay, great.
But I can introduce Eric and what we're doing next.
Well, we
If you
got
like.
consent agenda real quick.
Well, I'll wait for that.
Getting ahead of me. Next, we have the consent agenda. Before we do that, the two new commissioners are not permitted to vote because they were not commissioners at the time of the meeting. So is there a motion?
Move adoption of the consent agenda.
Second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Next item is a briefing, comprehensive plan overview and policies. Eric Engstrom. Susan, you're going to introduce this one?
Hey, just for a minute here, I couldn't help myself to jump in here because I'm just thrilled to have this document in front of us. It's been a bit of time coming, and there's been thousands of people involved in its development. It's an amazing document. I know you all will spend a good bit more time reviewing it. A lot of you have spent a lot of time in the development of it. For those who don't know much about the comprehensive plan, Eric's going to talk about it in more detail, but this is kind of a reminder that we haven't had a new comprehensive plan since 1980. And so I don't know where all of you were in 1980, but Jimmy Carter was president. I was thinking about going to planning school. There was just a lot of change. We had 360,000 people in the city, and now we have about 600,000. So a lot of change has happened. I think Max was still on the drawing boards, so this city has changed a lot in the almost 35 years. And so this next plan that this represents is a 20-year plan. And I just want to start by thanking Eric and Deborah and Joe Zender and all the staff, Kevin Martin and Derek, who put together the MAP app. How many of you have looked at the MAP app yet? So the new version is pretty amazing. I think it'll be a great tool, and Eric will show some parts of that tonight.
Kevin will do it.
Kevin will do that part. Just that the staff did an amazing job, and I think most people don't realize that in most cities around the country, when they do a new comprehensive plan, they basically come up with the RFP and go hire a private firm. And then they have a handful of staff that monitor the process and move it through. And we do 90% of this in-house, and I'm just really pleased. Instead, we make the choice to hire really quality staff in-house and do the work ourselves. So I just want to give these guys a round of applause for the great work they've done. And now for all of you, because I know all of you have been involved in everything from the policy expert groups. If we had done this round, a year or 2 years ago in the midst of developing the Portland plan, which is sort of the framework for the land use document, everyone on the commission was involved with a policy expert group. We had, I think, 9 or 10 different policy experts groups, probably 150 members, and just a lot of involvement. So this has been a long time coming. I think the amazing part is if you look on page 9, I-9, right in the front, we've got it down to 7 key directions. And I think it's just really important to look at those and to see that a comprehensive plan doesn't do any good if it's scattered over every topic, and it can't be strategic. And this has compiled thousands and thousands of comments and thousands of ideas into some very good direction, I think, for where we want the city to go. So I'll turn it over to Eric. We've got lots of multimedia entertainment tonight. We did a video in-house, everything but the voiceover we did in-house, so you can see how good our video skills are. This is our saving money attempt, but I think it's pretty good, and it's the first of 4 or 5 videos we're going to have. We've got the map app, which allows people not to have to come to meetings. They can sit at home and look at all the changes that are being made or potentially going to be made, and future directions, and be able to comment right there on their screen, and we can collect those comments. And so I'll turn it over to Eric, and I just am really impressed with the work that the staff has done and the involvement, literally, of thousands of people in the community. So,
thank you, Susan. And I'll reiterate the importance of the many advisory committees that fed into this. This wasn't just staff work, but a lot of community time spent on this as well. I'm going to start with just a refresher. What is the comp plan? Many of you have seen this before, but since we have a couple new commissioners, it's a good refresher to remind ourselves where we've been. And then we'll go into what's in the plan. This is the first of a couple different briefings, followed by public hearings. And so we'll go into, Deborah will join me at the end of the presentation to talk about the public involvement and that sequence. Tonight's focus is a little bit on the policies, but we want to introduce you to the whole plan. The next briefing in August will be focused more in depth on the maps. Again, we'll touch on that tonight. And then a briefing in September that goes deeper into the system plan and the infrastructure aspects as well. And then the public hearing sequence. What is the comp plan? It's, for one, as was mentioned, state mandated process. It's about preparing for growth and the physical development of the city. It has an investment component around being prepared for growth. What physical investments do we need to make? And it's also a decision-making guide for things related to land use and the physical, future physical development of the city. There's a state process that we're going through, and we're in the 4th element of that process. For those of you who were on the commission back in 2008 and 2009, you helped review a community involvement plan, which led to the committee Howard mentioned, the Community Involvement Committee. That was acknowledged by the state in 2010. We did about a foot of, if you stack it on a table, I should have brought it as a prop, but there's about a foot of background reports that were adopted with the Portland plan that also serve as the factual basis for this planning effort. Inventories, and I'll go over what that included in a minute. But that was acknowledged. Everything but the employment or the economic opportunities analysis has been acknowledged by the state as of last month. Task 3, we've started. It's not complete, but it kicked off with the growth scenario report that you reviewed in 2013, and we'll circle back to that as we go through this comp plan again. And then this, what's on the table tonight represents the bulk of Task 4, the actual plan, the goals and policies, maps and projects. Task 5 is the implementing the bundle of codes and zoning map amendments that will implement this new comp plan, and that will be brought to you in 2015. The factual basis or the background reports that I mentioned, there was the buildable lands inventory, the infrastructure conditions and capacity report, housing needs analysis, economic opportunities analysis. That's the one that I mentioned that is the city withdrew and will be resubmitting this fall, and you'll get another look at that when we resubmit. The natural resource inventory is also included in that. So those are all still on our website, and for the new commissioners, I would encourage you to look through that. I think the only person alive who has read all of them is maybe Chris Smith. But they're all there for review, and then they have informed what we're trying to do with this proposal. A bit of background fact. This is about preparing for growth. We're not trying to be the ones who are, we're not the ones who bring growth here, but we are trying to be prepared, and that's kind of a conservative, fiscally conservative thing, a cautious thing to do is be ready for growth. We take our numbers from the regional forecast, which is, says that there'll be roughly 122,000 new households added to the city on top of the approximately 260,000 households that are here today. That we will be adding approximately 140,000 new jobs. This is just a visual representation of the housing aspect of that. This is the distribution of housing today in the city in terms of where it's focused. And this is 2035, the forecast, that is. So a lot of what we recognize on today's map is still the same in 2035. A lot of existing, stable, single-family neighborhoods with most of the change focused on centers and corridors. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a minute. Susan mentioned now 35. Actually, I need to update this slide. It's closer to 35 now since 1980. But the city changed a lot in that time period up to 2010. And one aspect of that change was increasing diversity, and that will continue through the 2035 period. We also, as you know, changed geographies in that there's a large section of what's now East Portland was not part of the city in the 1980 plan. And so this is really the first comprehensive plan for that part of the city. And before I go too much further, I'm going to pause this and attempt to show a video.
This is one of the 4 or 5 videos, and I think it'll, here, I'll let you go with it.
So we don't know if the sound is going to work on this. That's the one glitch.
It's not working.
No. Hold on. Let me see if I can. Kevin, can you help me see if we can figure this out? Thought this might be an issue because I don't even.
So the reason we did these were not, most people don't want to come to a meeting, and we don't blame them. And we want them to be able to get access to the information. And things like centers and corridors are terms that you all are familiar with, but 10 years ago you might not have been. And we want people to understand some of the kinds of planning terms that we're talking about and make them simple and easy to understand in ways that people are, can see in the community. So this is one. There's going to be one on how to actually provide comments and testimony to the plan and the easiest ways to do that. There's going to be a series of different ones. So I think we just wanted to show you this one, and the others will be out in the next month or so. The different steps in terms of the different pieces.
Let's try playing again. I just don't know where the speaker is.
No.
Nope. Well, maybe we should save this for another time when we can figure out the
Yeah.
sound. It's on our website, and so we are getting a tiny bit of sound, but you're not going to be able to hear it, so.
It's like it's coming out of there.
Is it coming out of there? Yeah. That's funny.
You put a mic over there.
Okay.
I got it.
See if we can try it again with the mic over there.
If Kevin can't figure this out.
Where's it come from? Here. Right here? Not very loud.
Okay, well, we gave it 3 tries. It has audio. We're going to show this another time, and you can look at it on the web. I'm going to attempt to return to the PowerPoint presentation. Yes. Okay, so This is building off of the Portland plan, which the commission adopted in 2012, and the council adopted in 2012. The commission adopted a little bit before that. As you will recall, the Portland plan was a broader strategic planning effort that covered all the aspects of city government, not just physical development of the city and growth. So this is actually a little bit narrowing of the scope to focus in on land use and physical development. But we're carrying forward the intent and the goals of the Portland plan, and one aspect of that is the 12 measures of success that were adopted. So as you're reviewing the maps and policy proposals here, keep that in mind. Is one of the central questions is, are we advancing those measures in a bigger picture sense? You'll hear a lot about individual properties and individual policies, but this is kind of the benchmark. There are 4 elements to the current proposal: goals and policy document, which is what Susan was waving around there. The list of significant projects, which occurs in 2 places. It's actually physically a list in the back of the policy document, but it's much more easy to see in the map app that we will demo for you in a little bit. The comp plan map, there is a map also in the back of the policy document, 11 by 17, but it's a lot easier to see either in large format like what's in the back of the room, or on the map app you can zoom in and see individual properties and how it affects your neighborhood. The 4th element is that portions of the transportation system plan are legally speaking within the comprehensive plan, and I'll get into which portions as I get through this presentation. We also just released the citywide system plan and an urban design direction document, which you have. Both of those are supporting documents, essentially. The system plan has a lot more detail on what goes into the list of significant projects, and the urban design direction is an informational piece about what we mean by urban design and the urban design framework, and it will help inform folks, we hope, about what we're trying to accomplish with the plan. This is what those physical elements look like. They all kind of feed off each other. You can't really read one in isolation. The goals and policies inform the map construction. The map informs the projects. The goals and policies inform the projects. As I said, they relate to one another. Susan mentioned the 7 key directions. I'm just going to briefly introduce those, and then we'll get into those in a lot more detail as we get into the hearings process. One of them is, the first one is realizing the Portland Plan vision of complete, healthy, connected neighborhoods. And the way that manifests in the plan is an emphasis on centers and corridors, and that diagram on the screen is a center and corridor diagram emphasizing the places in the city that would be expected to receive the most growth and focus in this plan. You've seen this slide before, many of you, about what makes a complete neighborhood, but it's a whole suite of things, some of which are influenced by the comp plan map and things like zoning and development regulations. Others are broader than that, but in particular things like active transportation, quality housing, the ability of businesses to continue doing their work, access to public services. A lot of those have direct connections to the comp plan. An aspect of complete neighborhoods also is being able to get from one neighborhood to another, and so part of that is the connections in the city, the green connections, the transit system connections, rivers. One size does not fit all is another key concept that again, going back to the fact that this is the first, this is the first plan since we've annexed most of what's now East Portland. So we have to do more to recognize that not all of the city is physically the same. Improving naturally as an open space. Another key concept in this plan is that we're not just saying that everything inside the urban growth boundary is developed. There's green in the city and green infrastructure in the city and natural areas and access to that. Job growth is a key element, and we'll be talking a lot about land use decisions and infrastructure to support that aspect of the Portland plan. Resiliency, this has a big impact on land use in terms of not developing in the places we shouldn't, avoiding risk from hazardous areas, either floodplains or steep slopes, landslide hazards, climate preparation. Low carbon community, and that's a direct linkage to achieving the goals of the climate action plan. Reliable infrastructure that equitably serves all parts of the city. There are a couple elements to this, including maintenance of what we already have, addressing gaps and growth needs, and part of the addressing gaps is the equity aspect of not all the neighborhoods have equal access to existing infrastructure systems. So I'm going to switch gears now, and I put a Q in the PowerPoint. When you see those big dots up in the upper left, it means I'm changing subjects into a different part of the plan. So the first subject is the urban design framework, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is. It's something that wasn't in the 1980 plan. There were some drawings, but we never explicitly adopted a conceptual drawing. And the point of this is partly communication, to really, at a high level, the comp plan map it looks a little bit like the zoning map, and it's fairly detailed, and it's not good for communicating broad concepts. And so the urban design framework is an at-a-glance tool that is intended to communicate the big picture. Where is the city going physically? Where are the places that will be growth? Where are the green spaces? Where are the key transportation connections? Physical aspects of the city that are important to us. It also has a role in defining place types and language. It's not a development review tool, so that you won't see someone on the zoning counter breaking out the urban design framework and determining your compliance with it. This diagram is another view of it, which it's actually in the introduction of the plan, and it's in this document as well on page 6 and 7, if you want to be able to read the comments. As I said, it helps us define terms. So we define things like what is a town center and a civic corridor, a neighborhood center, station areas, greenways, employment districts, different pattern areas that represent the different types of neighborhoods in the city, whether that's inner neighborhood, East Portland neighborhood, or West, or river-oriented community. So this is an important document in terms of defining terms. It also gives some visual representation about what we mean by these different place types. So as you're talking about the different comp plan designations in terms of either neighborhood centers or town centers or civic corridors or the central city, this document helps determine what we mean by those different place types and what scale of development we expect. So this is a view of the kind of infill you might expect in a neighborhood center. It's fundamentally still primarily serving single-family areas, but there is a cluster of mixed use and higher intensity residential development at its core. On the slightly bigger scale is a town center, places like Hollywood or St. John's. And I should actually mention here, the comp plan map has a designation called urban center, and that includes both the town centers as well as the innermost ring of corridors that are within about a half a mile of the central city, that are the most accessible to the central city. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is. But there's two terms there that are used. Regional center, this is Gateway essentially. There's one regional center in the city of Portland. And then of course we have the central city as well. So it's intended to just illustrate that there's a scaling, a different hierarchy of scales in the city, and part of the purpose of the comp plan is to give people certainty about what level of growth they can expect in different places. And also it helps us develop an understanding of choices and provide different housing and development choices for people in different contexts. So again, one of those circles, I'm switching gears here now to the policy document. This is the outline of the policy goals. There's a chapter on guiding principles and the introduction. There's a community involvement Chapter, urban form, design and development, housing, economic development, environment and watershed health, public facilities, transportation, and administration. So goals and policies. Goals are the long-term outcomes we hope to achieve by implementing the plan. Policies are more specific preferred directions to describe what we need to do. Unlike the Portland plan, this is not an action plan, so we don't take it further and say, with the exception of the project list, we don't take it further and say, do this program or do this thing here, unless it's part of the project list. But policies do have some directionality to them. So what I'm going to do now is go through some of the key policy shifts in the plan, comparing 1980 with what this plan says. And there's only about a dozen things I'm going to cover. There's a lot more change, but this is kind of the top 12 or so, just to give you a sense of some of the policies that you're likely to discuss as we go into public hearing. First one is just a more direct focus on equity. In 1980, Portland was a much less diverse city, and there really wasn't that mandate to look at equity and diversity issues, and so there's a much more focused attention on that in this plan, we hope. Second is an explicit integration of public health goals and considerations, and this is carrying forward the Portland plan. And we've worked a lot with our health partners in how can we integrate public health decision-making into comp plan and land use decisions. So you'll see health much more prevalent in this document. There isn't a health chapter, but it's explicit in a lot of different chapters. A much more robust community involvement chapter. In 1980, I think the community involvement chapter fit on one page, and it basically said, go talk to neighborhood associations. And today we're in a much more nuanced environment of outreach. It needs to have a lot more channels and different approaches, and this chapter reflects that. I already mentioned the one size does not fit all. In 1980, primarily we were talking about what's now what we call inner Portland, but the new plan has much more explicit policy about recognizing geographic differences across the city, and that may play out in the physical development of the city. An emphasis, in 1980 we did have a corridors focus. So the idea of growing in centers and corridors is not new, but what is maybe different is that we're trying to focus it more and be more specific about where those places are within the city. We had a concern with affordable housing in 1980, but it was much more about avoiding concentration and having goals around a mix. But this plan has a much more specific focus on creating and encouraging affordable housing in what we call opportunity areas. And what that means is that there's sometimes a tendency to build affordable housing where land is cheap, and where land is cheap is usually a place where it's not a very accessible location for the residents who are going to live there. So in the outer edges of the city with lack of access to transit, few sidewalks, so this plan has a much more specific policy on encouraging affordable housing in high opportunity areas, in places that do have good access to transit, are close to jobs and the central city. And that's not easy, but that's a policy shift. This plan has much more focus on the growth of colleges and large hospitals and high school campuses. So the idea of campus job growth is a key part of the job strategy here. And that's different from the 1980 plan, which primarily looked at colleges and hospitals and campuses as something that was a conditional use process that you had to get an exception to do. And so we're more on its face recognizing that campuses are here to stay, and we need to continue to work with them on their planning.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
On the housing, presumably the new direction would be to ensure that affordable housing doesn't get pushed into an area without any services, but still would avoid concentration, overly concentrating. Is that right?
Yeah, there's still both, but right now there maybe isn't enough emphasis on accessible locations.
Right.
There's a lot of accessible locations.
Right, yeah, exactly, so there's,
Consideration and integration of watershed health, nature in the city, and green infrastructure. These are not new ideas to the city of Portland, but they hadn't been in the comp plan. The old comp plan was much more about a narrower issue of protecting stream corridors and zoning along stream corridors. A wider emphasis on maintaining existing infrastructure and the financial constraints around building infrastructure. Essentially, this is a grow up, not out comp plan, which further emphasizes the need to maintain what we have in terms of existing infrastructure. There is a project list, but we know that it needs to be right-sized to the financial resources we have. That's part of what we're going to do over the next year. Greater emphasis on multimodal performance standards. The old comp plan, although it encouraged alternatives to single occupancy vehicles, it ultimately judged the performance of the transportation system based on throughput of individual vehicles through intersections. And we're proposing a much clearer policy that says we measure multiple modes across multiple modes when we look at system performance. For goods, that's for people movement. For goods movement, we also have a greater emphasis in this plan on investments to improve access to industrial lands, and this relates to the employment strategy. For people movement, a priority on design given to the most vulnerable road users. Again, I said that we encouraged alternatives to the automobile in the 1980 plan, but that doesn't always mean that we designed infrastructure for those users. 13 there is greater transparency in how projects are selected to be built. That's part of the narrowing of the project lists over the next year and involving the public in that. Last one is an emphasis on schools as multi-use facilities that serve the community. This comes from the Portland plan. The old comp plan had a school policy, but the implementation regulations often treated schools as kind of aliens in the neighborhood that needed to be discouraged, and so that's a little bit flipping that policy on its head. So those are the biggest, what I would call the biggest policy shifts, and I suspect some of the things you'll hear about a lot in testimony as different groups weigh in with their perspective. Shifting gears again to the map, and we will get to the map app demo in just a moment. There are 4 categories of map changes, and this is really just a way of simplifying it. There are a lot of map changes, but we've tried to categorize it into 4 subjects. Things related to the centers and corridors, things related to jobs, things related to risks, and by that I mean either hazards, public health and safety issues like development on slopes or in areas that have landslide hazards. But a second part of that is service gaps like areas that lack sidewalks or in the case of East Portland, the David Douglas School District and some of their enrollment capacity struggles. The last category is neighborhoods, parks, and open space, which I'll get into in a minute. So this is on the wall in the back of the room as well, but this is a map of all the different map changes to the comp plan that we're proposing with this draft. So it's by far not the whole city. It's a small percentage of the city, but it does affect a lot of different people in a lot of different places. So the one message is that a lot of people are not going to have any comp plan map change at all. The central city is blank, you'll notice, because there's a separate Central City 2035 process that's developing the map changes for that area that will be rolled into the comprehensive plan as that process catches up and gets integrated. But we didn't show that with this proposed draft. So the centers and corridors related changes, continued emphasis on strong central city growth, increased housing opportunities in transit accessible neighborhoods close to the central city, several new town center designations on the urban design framework, which will also play out in the map. We're trying to correct a number of non-conforming situations where we have, for example, a business that's located in a residential zone And in some cases where those businesses are near centers and corridors where we're trying to encourage more vibrant development, we're allowing those to become conforming by redesignating them as employment or mixed use. And we added commercial zoning in a few selected locations, mainly to increase where there's gaps in coverage of commercial zoning, where it's difficult, where you have to travel long distance to get to commercial uses. So that's what this layer looks like. And one of the key messages here is we are essentially remapping and redesignating all of the commercial and mixed use zones in the city with this proposal. And the mixed use zoning project, which is underway as an implementation project, is going to be developing the new palette of zoning tools to implement this. So this is a big aspect of the comp plan, is to remap the mixed use and commercial areas to comport with the urban design framework of the place types that I mentioned earlier, the town centers and the neighborhood centers and the different types of corridors. Employment, I mentioned colleges and hospitals. There's a proposal in here to create some additional employment land in Gateway to kind of see if we can create an east side equivalent of the Central East Side Industrial District. Some employment designation on 82nd Avenue rather than high density housing. A number of other sites in East Portland to increase access to jobs in East Portland. 2 golf courses, Riverside and Broadmoor, we're proposing to change the comprehensive plan on to employment uses. Doesn't mean that those uses go away immediately, but it allows for a future conversion. There is a unique West Hayden Island designation, which we'll get into as you discuss that. This is the map of those places. Risks and service gaps. This includes a couple different things. One is removing some multifamily designations in the David Douglas School District to give them a little bit, to reduce some of the development pressure on that school district. Doesn't stop growth, but it slows down relative to what might have happened otherwise. Retain capacity for multifamily development and mixed-use development at a specific node at 122nd and Division, and this is an area that is also subject to the Powell Division high-capacity transit study, and so there's a possibility for much better enhanced transit service through that corridor. So we're recommending leaving a denser node at that intersection. Density reductions in a couple areas related to other public health and safety issues like landslide hazards, areas where it's difficult to get rid of stormwater, areas where there's some fire access hazard safety issues with emergency vehicles getting there easily. And so this is kind of the reverse of the centers and corridors growth strategy, is to reduce density, places that are far from centers and corridors and difficult to serve or have hazards.
Now, in that instance, thinking about climate change and the potential for changes in floodplains, FEMA regulations, so forth, was all that was all taken into
Yeah, some of these are in floodplains, and so the map up here, the 2 biggest concentrations of this kind of change are in outer southeast Portland, in some of the Johnson Creek floodplain, and then also in the Tryon Creek Basin in southwest Portland. Both of those are places where there are slopes and floodplain issues and landslide issues, and so it's very much in that resiliency and avoiding. It's in the climate adaptation vein.
Was fire risk part of that?
There were a number of layers we reviewed, including that, and we also consulted with Fire Bureau and emergency services in terms of understanding how these areas relate to access. Neighborhoods, parks, and open space, this is the last category. There's 2 main elements of this. One is to adjust some residential density in areas where there might be a prevalent existing development pattern of 1 house every 7,000 square feet, but the zoning is R5, 1 per 5,000, and that's a slight mismatch that doesn't always work well. And so we've fine-tuned some of the densities to where there's a predominant R7 development pattern. We've changed it from R5 to R7 in some areas. Second major theme there is, again, these are areas outside of centers primarily. Second theme is to update the open space designation. And I shouldn't, this is actually a typo, I shouldn't have said zoning there. It's designation because we're not to zoning yet. But we've updated the designations for open space to reflect the last decade or so of parks acquisition to make that up to date. That's that. And this is cue for Kevin to come up and give us a demo of the map app. I'll sit up there and let you. Yeah, let me struggle with it. There you go.
All right. Okay, I'm Kevin Martin. I'm the Technical Services Manager in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So I'm kind of the head IT guy, which makes it really embarrassing that I wasn't able to make the audio work. Bear with me. I got a couple slides here I'm just going to go through real quick just to give you a little context about why we're doing what we're doing in terms of building these apps. The stuff that we do lends itself well to a map. So we're applying stuff to the ground, zoning, we have transportation projects. These are geographic things. So maps are a real, and we've been using maps for a long time, maps are a real good way to kind of communicate what we want to do to the public. And the online maps are especially effective engagement tool because people immediately kind of see where they are and what it is that you're talking about. They can see where their house is, they can see where they live, they can see where they work. Bringing people into what it is you're presenting just kind of engages them right off the bat. And it reaches a new, wider demographic. So we do a really good job, I think, in the Bureau with our print documents. You have one of them sitting in front of you, I think turned out really, really well. My team contributed to that also. We do a really good job with our open houses. Those are tools that we've used effectively for a really long time, but there's a demographic out there that wants to look at this stuff when they want to look at it, on whatever device it is that they want to look at it on. They want to do it 24/7. That's a demographic that we haven't really captured very well before. We have our website, and there's a lot of information on it, but it's not super engaging. It's more of a place to find information. So we're trying to build these apps that kind of bring people in, make them compelled to want to find out more, and hopefully broaden their reach. And kind of related to that, it gets people's attention. So as you all know, I'm sure there's a lot of competition for people's attention nowadays. This is a way to kind of break through that. So you're doing something new and creative and hopefully kind of get people interested in it, get people's attention, get a little bit of media attention, and kind of bring them to what you want to show them. And we've been fairly successful in that so far. For those of you who were here 9 months ago or so, you might remember that we had a previous map app. We're calling it version 1. This was much more, presenting a much more conceptual phase of the plan. It was a little bit different, and I'll explain why in a second. But it was pretty successful. It brought a lot of people to the table. So the analogy I like to use is imagine having a public meeting about the comprehensive plan in Providence Park, so the Timbers Stadium, and filling every single seat in that stadium and having people standing in the aisles. And so we brought 22,000 people, 22,000 unique individuals visited this app in that 3-month period that it was up. That's a lot of people to look at a planning project. I think that's a success. We're hoping this one brings in even more. The downside of that is if you've got that meeting going on in Providence Park, you've got about 5 minutes to keep people interested before they get up out of their seats and walk out the door. And so that's one of the things we're learning is you can bring a lot of people to the table, but you got to tell them something interesting. You got to present them something that they can relate to, and you got to do it in a way that they can access it quickly or they're going to leave. And I think we were fairly good at that last time around, but we've kind of honed our message a little bit and really sort of focused in on what we want to communicate to people. which is my next
So
point.
how many people of the 22,000 stayed?
Well, of those 22,000 people, about 1,200 people, I think, commented. So they provided some kind of feedback to us. And so that's, not a ton, but it's a fair number. I'd like to see that number go up this time around, so we'll see that percentage go up. One other thing we learned is people prefer a shared discussion. That was the biggest piece of feedback we got last time around. So I don't want to get too in the weeds, but last time you were able to kind of give us a piece of feedback, and it kind of lived in isolation. Other people had to click on it to see what you said. This time around, people can comment on a specific change and see all of the other people's comments as well. So it's more of a threaded kind of discussion form. And for better or worse, I think that's really how people want to communicate. They want to see not only what they say, but also what everybody else is saying as well. So it kind of creates this conversation. And that was definitely something we took right out of the old version that we didn't have, that we built into this new one.
This isn't going to turn into the comment section of Oregon Live, is it?
It's not going to turn into the comment section.
A slightly more serious question. Did
You have my
consider-
promise. It's not anonymous, so that will get us a long way there.
Did you consider using any elements of gamification to keep people engaged? Is there a way you can drive them towards a policy goal in a way that's more engaging?
That's definitely sort of another tool that we're looking at. So this online mapping stuff is kind of one suite of apps that we've played around with a little bit, and there's a lot of talk about gamification and kind of getting people engaged into like a shared goal. And we're exploring that stuff as well. So kind of the same tools, just expressed a little bit differently. The other thing we learned is that mobile is really hard. It's really, really hard to develop an app, especially a web app that works on mobile devices. But you just have to do it because so many people, that's really the only way they're looking at your stuff. Something like 60% of people, I think, are now coming to the web primarily from a mobile device. It's just something you have to do.
It works that way.
It does. That's not gonna I'll hurry this along. So what we know about this version, mobile is hard, but necessary. So we took a stab at making this. It's a responsive application, so it works on all devices. It's definitely harder to make it work well on mobile devices, so it's going to look a little bit better right now on your desktop than it does on your iPhone, but we're still working away on that. And everything we learned from this, we can take to stuff moving forward. So it's all a good exercise. We built this entirely in-house. I think Susan mentioned that as well. Not only was this document produced in-house, but this entire map app was produced in-house. Didn't cost us a whole lot. It was a couple people's staff time over the last 3 to 4 months, and no consultants. And consultants, I'm not bad-mouthing consultants, but it allows us to be much more strategic about how we use consultants if we're able to do this stuff in-house. And of course, it saves us money. It's not perfect yet. The public's going to help it make it better, so we're already getting a whole bunch of feedback. Please send yours. And it was released yesterday, and we've already gotten a fair amount of attention. So we released a preview app to about 750 people who signed up for that. It was immediately picked up on Oregon Live. So there was Brad Schmidt posted something up there. It was picked up on the Portland Mercury blog town. And we've had a lot of other media inquiries by Portland. So it's already getting a fair amount of attention. We've had about 50 comments today, so the first day that it was fully up. So we're off and on our way. So I'll give you a demo now.
Just imagine 50 comments here in this forum. I appreciate the value of having it.
I'm going to refresh this. So this is what it looks like. I heard that a few of you have looked at it already. If you view the map, we talked about sort of the 3 components of the comp plan: land use, transportation, TSP projects, and infrastructure. So that's stormwater, water, parks, and sewer projects. We'll focus a little bit on land use. All of these maps are broken into kind of, I'm calling them bite-sized chunks. We actually call them themes, but I'll call them bite-sized chunks here. So taking the sort of big map with all the proposed changes and breaking them into these more digestible categories and providing people information about that specific category of change. So these align what Eric was just talking about: centers and corridors, jobs, risks and service gaps, neighborhoods, parks, and open space. And you can click on any of these and just see that particular map. It's fully interactive, so you can obviously zoom in and out. I'm going to go back and just show everything. And then you can click on things and get more information about a particular proposal. And this is really hard to read up here, I apologize. I'm not going to try to mess around with the zoom. But it tells you why we're making this change. And you can actually click, of course it's not working right now. So you can, when you're at home doing this, click on this stuff and it's going to provide you more information about why we made that change. And for each of these comp plan designations, the existing comp plan designation, the proposed comp plan designation, the existing zone, and the proposed zone, it'll give you a little blurb that tells you about each of those things. And again, the goal here is to kind of give people sort of the core information very quickly and then send them off to our website or send them off to our helpline or send them off to staff if they want more detailed information. And it's one thing that we didn't do last time was make it property focused. So this version of the app is, so you can type in your address. It looks in a quarter-mile radius around whatever address you put in, and then it just tells you what projects or proposed changes are in that quarter-mile area. So this happens to be my house. These are the 5 land use change proposals.
We had time to move.
Yeah, that's right. It'll become an island here. And it tells you there's 1 of 5, so there's 5 different ones. You can browse through these and see each one. And this is where you can also kind of give us the feedback. So there's this little comment. We're going to make this more apparent because it's not super apparent right now. Here's where you can provide that feedback. And these are really hard to read, and it's pointless reading them now because I put all of these in, and they all say test, don't enter into the public record. So these are ones that I entered yesterday. Anybody can go in and add their own comment. You just put in your name, email, address, zip code, whatever comment you want to leave. You can type up to 2,500 characters in this box if you really want to tell us a lot. And you submit it, and it just adds it to that comment thread. So you'll just see that comment added here. This becomes part of the official record. That actually becomes official testimony that will eventually make its way to you all here. I don't know, 1,000 is a lot, so maybe we'll boil that down a little bit. There was one other thing. Oh, of course, there's a legend for the map. So the sort of main map controls are here at the bottom. And then we tried to build in, think about, okay, somebody's here. They don't know a lot about this project. They don't know a lot about the plan. Let's give them some of the top FAQs right here in the app. So there's actually a little sort of mini page here in the app with FAQs about the comprehensive plan, about land use, and about the transportation systems plan. And these are actually really useful, and we're pulling this information. It was a really useful exercise to build these FAQs because it forced is a strong word, but forced us to say what we wanted to say in a small space that fit into this app. And then we have a contact page as well. Again, you want to know more than the app has told you. Something in the app doesn't work the way you want to. You want to know more about the TSP. You want to call our helpline and talk to somebody about the changes that we're proposing. You want to go to the website and see more information. All that information is right here. And this all works on mobile as well. Actually, if you change the app, it kind of redesigns itself as it gets smaller. And so you can go into that contact page, and that's what it looks like on a mobile device. I think that's it.
All right. Who's doing the tech support on this?
I'll be here. if anybody has questions.
Is there a 24/7 tech support on this number?
But it,
I mean, when you go away, it's going to die, isn't it?
no.
It's not. So there's multiple staff that are sort of responsible for this, and we're actually getting back in touch with people pretty quickly when they give us feedback. We don't tell them how long it will take because we don't want to set an expectation, but we're getting back to people within a few hours.
It's really good. It's really good.
And if you all want individual help to kind of like walk through it, and I'm sure that Kevin or Derek or Eric or others will meet you for coffee and walk you through how to do it. Just bring your phone.
Well, there are other questions I have.
Mike's already doing it.
Mike?
Yeah, this is through the Bureau of Planning website and then comprehensive plan site, and then there's links from there. within the comprehensive plan website.
I just want it to be easy for people to be able to go map
Are we
it.
gonna feature, it should be on.
Eventually, you'll just be able to Google that. It'll take a little while for people to index it, but probably by next week, it'll be at the top of the Google search.
It is the old one, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, so we're going to continue, move on to a slightly different topic. The remaining issues are to just briefly mention the citywide system plan and the TSP, and then we'll talk a little bit about public involvement and the hearings process. So I mentioned we released another draft of the citywide systems plan. It has infrastructure information about a variety of city functions. The different bureaus essentially have different chapters within this in terms of water, transportation, parks and recreation. The transportation chapter is blank because the TSP fulfills that role right now, just for your information. So if you're looking for that, go to the TSP. The services that it covers include city services, water, sanitary sewer, stormwater, streets, parks. The mandatory state requirement is to have a public facilities plan that covers water, sewer, and transportation. So that's the part that we'll be submitting to the state. And this kind of explains that in a quick slide, that there's the citywide systems plan, which is overall supporting the comp plan. Within it is something that we will call the public facilities plan that is the state mandated part that will get packaged together and shipped to the state. But for the sake of the city having a coordinated system plan that covers all the systems, we're doing it as a whole plan. This fulfills, it's on a continuum ranging from, on an annual basis, we report to City Council on the state of our assets, the state of all our existing infrastructure, and we make annual budget decisions. At the 5-year level, there's a 5-year capital planning process. This is at the other end of the spectrum, the 20-year level of long-term planning. Some of the projects on the 20-year plan are in the short-term horizon, but many of them are in the longer term. And that's where it's a little tricky to do financial forecasting because it's sometimes hard to know what's going to be happening 20 years from now. Another key aspect of this is the investment strategy, and you can't really read the details on this, but I want to just describe the concept here. It's in the plan, actually on a couple different pages, but in the introduction, but also on page 21 of the CSP document. Each of the circles on this diagram represents one of the centers in the centers map in the urban design framework, so a place essentially. So places like the Central City, Gateway, Lentz, St. John's, Cully. And there are two axes. There's the left, right, and up and down. And the left, right is based on the amount of growth. So things at the right-hand side of the diagram are growing more and will be bigger by 2035. The size of the dot is the absolute size of the places. So obviously the Central City is the biggest place, it's the biggest dot, Gateway is the second. The most growth, as I mentioned, is the Central City followed by Gateway. So that's why they're at the right-hand side of the diagram. The up-down axis is need, and that's defined as essentially things with high need are places that lack basic infrastructure, like they have a lack of sidewalks or lack of access to transit or lack of other needed public facilities. If you're trying to figure out what your strategy is, you might have different investment strategies in different places with some attention to the things in the upper right where there's a lot of growth and a lot of need. The brown versus gray is also a designation to show that the brown circles are the ones with a higher percentage of what we call vulnerable populations, which would include lower income households, households with lower levels of education, communities of color. And so coincidentally, or maybe not, the upper right-hand corner covers all those bases. It's high percentage of vulnerable households, a lot of growth, and lack of infrastructure. So that's an area that's going to have a lot of focus in the infrastructure part of this plan.
Can I ask go back to the capital for just a second? Just a question I'd like to look at later. One of the big issues in the city, and Marie or somebody might comment on this, is Because for a long time, there's been inability to capitalize a lot of the green infrastructure that we're interested in seeing more of in the city. Is in the capital is the green infrastructure, trees, et cetera, considered part of the capital?
There were a
Discussion.
lot of, one of the, if I was listing the changes since the last draft of the CSP, and I know you made this comment in the last draft, that there was a lot of effort to upgrade our treatment of green infrastructure
Right.
in that document. So hopefully you'll be happy with the direction that's.
Well, good. Yeah, I'm very happy with the language in here. I just want to follow the money, where the money's going to be invested, and that's been a huge issue, capitalizing those assets. So, conversation for later.
So as I mentioned, a subset of that is the transportation system plan, and it kind of gets its own label because it's such a big piece of growth management. It's under a separate cover. It includes policies, projects, financial plan, street maps. Parts of it are adopted with the comp plan, including the basic policies, which are in Chapter 9, the project lists, and eventually the street classifications and street plans. Other parts of the document provide supporting information and more detailed implementing measures that are not technically part of the core comp plan, but are still in the TSP document. And it's also driven by state and metro requirements independent of the comp plan. It's coming in pieces, so what you're getting now is the citywide policies in Chapter 9. You're getting the current draft of the priority projects in the MAP app, and you're getting some draft of the selection criteria that the PBOT will be using to narrow the list. What you don't have yet is the project list is not ranked, so there's more projects than we can afford in there now. You don't have the completed financial plan, and we don't have completed transportation modeling to document system performance with this complete list. And that will evolve over the next year, but you'll get the first big installment of that second in the fall. Finally, more in 2015, you're going to get more specific implementing measures like the street classification maps and any codes or administrative rule changes that would come with that. This is a document or diagram that PBOT has prepared that just explains the relationship and the fact that the TSP and the comp plan overlap each other in that area of the project list and the goals and policies. There's a lot more below the TSP, including all the different mode plans, like the freight plan or the bike plan or the pedestrian master plan. Those all relate and all relate back to the Portland plan and the climate plan too. This slide just summarizes the current draft criteria that are being discussed for how we narrow the project list with transportation, and it's a multi-faceted criteria that would be used to rank projects, including things like safety, public health, economics, equity, cost effectiveness, and whether it improves access. And this just illustrates that this is a narrowing process that starts kind of now and moves through the fall. You have a role in it in the public hearings you'll hold, eventually with implementing measures later in the process. And this is my cue. I'm not going to make you read this slide, but it's my cue to have Deborah come up here and talk about the process. Basically what Deborah will talk about is what we're doing over the summer to make people aware of this proposal and some of the scheduling and process for how we'll review this in the hearings.
Hi, so I am Deborah Stein. So in this new phase, now that we have a proposal out, we're shifting to some degree how we're doing our community engagement. We're really shifting into a new realm, partly because we have a proposal to put on the table with something very specific we want to encourage people to review, but we also have some new audiences we want to be reaching. So we have some new approaches to how we're getting the word out and engaging Portlanders. I'd say for this phase of our process, we have 5 kind of objectives we're trying to carry out. One is simply to widely share the plan, get it out as much as possible so people know it's out there, what it means and doesn't mean. We want to make information as easy to understand as possible, so a lot of emphasis on helping people understand stuff that's inherently pretty complicated and really help people digest it and understand the personal meaning of how it may affect them directly or indirectly. We want to continue to engage people who have been involved up till now. We have been at this for a long time. We've had, as you've heard, thousands of people who've put a lot of sweat and thought and energy and time into this process. We want to keep them engaged. But we also want to bring some very special effort to reaching people who have never heard about the comprehensive plan, don't know that they should even know that this exists or why they should care. So there are whole new audiences we need to be reaching. And those include property owners who are directly affected, tenants, both commercial tenants, small businesses who may be in a building that is affected by a proposed map change, and they don't know yet that they should be paying attention to this. So tenants are a really big part of our sort of problem solving. How do we best reach tenants through our community engagement? We want to be looking at residents of areas that we've already identified, areas that are at risk of gentrification and displacement. There may be communities of color or other populations where we think they need some special outreach to know that some proposals on the table may have an effect on them indirectly or directly that could be important for them to understand. So we're going to do some special outreach to them. And then our final objective is to not only get people to understand what's out there and what we're proposing, but help build some capacity for folks to understand how they can channel their comments to you. So it's a lot of education about how people can most effectively formulate and then provide testimony to you about what matters. So that's a piece of our work as well. So this slide is showing one of the ways in which we're reaching one of those audiences, and that's property owners. So a few weeks ago, we sent out a mailer to all properties that are shown for a mixed-use designation. About 10,000 individual property owners received a flyer. It's actually a trifold with some information about what we're proposing for all mixed use. So this is any property that is commercially zoned today that is being sort of relabeled with this new mixed-use category. They got this flyer. It has a lot of information both about the comprehensive plan, but also is a preview of some of the mixed-use zones project that's coming up that's going to actually provide a whole new set of mixed-use zones and with more detail about that. So that mailer has gone out. What's next is a postcard, which you see at the bottom. It's going to start being received starting next Monday, I believe. Another 10,000 property owners who have properties that are affected by a different kind of map change. So anything that's not mixed use, they'll get this other postcard. And the purpose of that postcard, again, is to say, hey, in a kind of a friendly way, we want to give you a heads up that we're proposing a change through this comprehensive plan, and here are the different ways you can learn more. And it really is helping people. It doesn't say specifically what the change is, but it's saying you are subject to a proposed change. We want you to learn more, so you can go to the MAP app, you can call, you can send an email, you can look on the website. There are various ways. We really want to help you understand what this means. Both of these were intended to be kind of friendly heads up, because a month prior to your first public hearing, which is scheduled for September 23rd, so approximately a month before that, we're going to start sending out legally required notices to property owners. And that's a little bit more of a daunting message. It's a little bit more structured, a little more formal. So we wanted these ways to be an initial heads up. We'd like you to learn more and have a month or so to really do some of that community education before they get that more formal notice. To accompany all of this, we have set up what we're calling our comp plan helpline. This is something new that we actually learned from the sustainability side about how they got a lot of information when we changed some rules, whenever that was, a year or so ago, 2 years ago. We've set up a helpline where we have people who are literally at the phones, who are, and we just staffed up as of today with some training. These are folks who are going to be able to answer phone calls, really listen to people who have questions, who really want to have something explained. They may be people who got a notice but don't have a computer at home or aren't really comfortable looking up the information online. So we want to walk people through it with a lot of really sort of responsive customer service. And it's already, we've had the helpline up for a couple weeks with just one staff person so far. And it's really proved to be a great way to allow people to just, say what's confusing to them or what their fears are or what they need to know more about, and we really talk them through it. So taking the time to listen, I think, is proving to be a really good avenue to help provide that more accessible information. So we're going to, as I say, build more of that with more staff people. And I'm really excited to hear how this goes and to hear how the public responds to having that kind of customer service.
Maybe you could just mention, like, after we sent out the first postcard, what happened the first week?
Yeah, we got something like 100 phone calls within a few days, and it peaked. There was definitely a big wave and a lot of, oh my God, what does this mean? And then it kind of dipped down. It's been a little bit erratic. We're trying to learn a lot from both the waves, because this is new for us, so we're trying to figure out, are there particular waves of when, like after something first arrives in the mailbox, of course we get a lot of calls. One of the things we're also kind of excited about this capacity that we're building is that our helpline staff can inform us what messages are particularly clear, what messages are confusing, so we can do kind of real-time improvement of our communications by learning what's clear and what's not, and we can continue to fine-tune that. Or what I was telling the group today is if we find there's a whole area of town that we're not hearing from, that could mean one of two things. Either they're really happy or we really missed them somehow and we need to diagnose that and go in further. So we're going to learn a lot from what we're hearing from where and where we might need to kind of fortify our public outreach and do some more activity because we're not reaching people. So I think we're going to get a lot of good information that's going to improve our communication, but also provide more capacity within neighborhoods.
Deborah, you guys just completed an immigrant inventory of Portland. How's that going to work into the comp plan?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, we did some analysis of where we have populations with limited English proficiency, and we overlaid that with where we have some risks of gentrification and displacement, and then we overlaid that with where we have some concentrations of proposed map changes to see, are there particular communities where we want to go in? I was going to mention that. Go in and do a little bit more outreach and work with the community engagement liaisons, which are leaders in several immigrant and refugee communities in Portland, and they're sort of a portal or our ambassadors into those communities. So we can work with those community engagement liaisons to kind of open the door for us, and we can learn what kinds of issues are most important to particular communities and how we can best communicate those and what changes may be proposed that positively or potentially negatively affect folks, and get information back that we can feed into this process. So that's a whole layer of our work that I was going to mention. Let's go to the next slide. So I was going to mention that, as well as some other things we're doing just to get the word out more broadly. At a really basic level, we're going to do displays. We started a display down in the lobby of this building. That's going to be enhanced as we go. We wanted to get some boards up today, but we'll be continuing to improve that display. And that can be an ongoing display just to kind of intercept people who are coming into the building anyway, maybe on their way to the Bureau of Development Services. They might stop and take a look and see what we've got going. But we're also going to schedule some open houses at 2 other offsite locations in the community. Probably one in East Portland somewhere, one in St. John's area, and those are about to be scheduled. Just again, to have some opportunity to talk face-to-face with people, but also have some informational boards. We're going to have a virtual open house on the website, try and make it a more engaging experience than just looking at really static pages. So we're working on that right now to bring some of this information to life. Of course, we have the MAP app, which I love how Kevin talks about the MAP app actually as a public engagement tool. I think it's really one of our best interactive tools that we've got. We've put little ads in community newspapers to let people know about what's going on, and we'll do that through August and September, advertising what we're doing. We're working with social media. We've got our e-newsletter that goes out to, I don't know how many people, a few thousand people, and that will continually update the public. And that's going to people, admittedly, who are already in the loop, who've expressed interest and are already showing interest. So that's reaching people we've already reached. But a lot of our efforts, as I say, are trying to catch the people who we haven't yet reached. We'll do a little bit of summer tabling like we've done in the past at Sunday Parkways and other kinds of events. We're also having the district liaisons schedule what we're calling kind of office hours, where they're going to be stationed, and we'll advertise the times and locations in public libraries or community centers. We'll just have a little table and have a laptop, and we'll let people just know that there's a planner there. Come talk to the planner in the middle of the community center on a Saturday afternoon or a Thursday evening. So we, again, really want to have as much face-to-face personal customer service to explain stuff to people and really help answer their questions. Whether they got the postcard and want to know what it means, or they're just walking by and want to know more about the comp plan. We're arranging for some very targeted small business outreach. We're working with Venture Portland and other business organizations to make sure that those businesses where the property owner may have gotten the notice about what's proposed for the property, but the business itself may not know about what's being proposed. So we need to reach those small businesses about some of those mixed-use changes. I mentioned the community engagement liaisons for our immigrant and refugee communities. We'll continue to work with our diversity and civic leadership organizations, and those are the 5 organizations we work with closely through the Portland Plan. That's Urban League, NEA, Latino Network, Center for Intercultural Organizing, and pardon me? And IRCO. Yeah, thank you. And so that's kind of the bundle of activities that we're doing all through the summer. And so through all of this, we're, oh, and I wanted to mention that, maybe I did, that we really, in addition to sharing the plan itself and making sure people know about it, we do want to build the capacity so people feel like they understand how they can best provide testimony to you. And that's important, not just to make sure we get all those voices into the mix, but it's long-term. I think that's has a real enduring value to raise awareness of how people do have that voice and how they can use it and how they can testify to you, to City Council, and in future public policy discussions as well. So I think that that's got a kind of a secondary advantage to building that educational component and then that capacity. So these are different ways we're letting folks know that they can provide testimony to you through the MAP app, as Kevin was talking about, email, and regular mail. And we've been sharing the dates of the public hearings. As you know, we have 4 hearings that are scheduled. The first and the September 23rd and the November 4th are both here. And then we're scheduling the October hearings out in the community, and we'll be announcing those locations soon so that we can make sure they're as convenient and accessible to the public as possible. And having them in off-site locations, I think, really is a nice gesture and also just offers some convenience to folks.
Were there going to, excuse me, were going to be 2 or 3 of the 5 out in the community?
2 of the 4, and then
4.
the November through January is just work sessions, and those are, those will be back here. Okay. And finally, here's our comp plan hot helpline. This is Sarah Wright, who has been staffing the helpline up till now, and she's organizing the larger crew now. And she's on the phones. She and her team now are on the phones Monday through Friday from 9 to 5, and then Monday evenings till 8 p.m. So we have extended helpline hours. So we're really excited about how that's all going to work.
I think one of the things we're finding is that people will call with a specific question related to planning, but very quickly move into that they have other issues that they want to talk about at the city. And sometimes it'll be a 10 or 15-minute phone call, and at the end, there's just such a, there's such a sense of being listened to that there's so much value there. And then we're taking information that we're getting from there and passing it on to the bureaus as appropriate, that we heard this, you need to know about this, or connecting them. Because I think most citizens just don't feel like they have a place to actually call to register, how they're feeling about a particular issue. So I think it's going to be some money well spent in terms of,
Yeah.
of the time and the people that we're putting together. And then the other component of that is that it's a real-time kind of thing that we put, you always do these FAQs and you think up what you think is the best answer right then, and yet constantly you learn a better way to say it. But we can't constantly be updating everything to everybody. Well, this way, we have sort of a weekly check-in to go back and say, should we be changing, how we're messaging this and how we're providing information to the public. And so one last thing I wanted to say is, as you're reviewing this, which I know you're all just gonna stay up late tonight looking at the document, think about what we did with the Portland Plan and go back to those 12 measures of success, because that's really what we're trying to measure in terms of how will this impact jobs? How will this impact affordable housing? How will this impact the environment in different ways? And then also look at these 7 key directions. And did we miss one? Look at the real basic issues here. Did we miss something? And comment on that early and get that back to us. And because I think the earlier you all begin to think of, is there something that we really missed, which there may be. But also just as you're looking in the policies and you're looking, for example, at a transportation goal or an environmental goal, try to think about what are the job components of those goals. That again, these are not each in its own little bucket, and that in the past, comprehensive plans were done. Land use, housing, each one, there would be, 17 elements in a plan and they didn't intersect. And I think we really tried to hear, after doing the Portland Plan, realize that almost all of this is interconnected. So, thanks.
Thank you. One just logistics note, as I mentioned before, we'll have the couple more briefings before you actually go into public hearing mode. Once we're in public hearings, the staff will largely stay out of the way and not make presentations like tonight. This was our one kind of opportunity to go on at length, so we did. But so you'll want to start saving up your questions as you start hearing the testimony, and then we'll go into the work session process. And like we did in the Portland Plan, at some point early in that work session process, we will work with you to draft kind of a directional statement saying, here are the, from what we heard, what are the key issues we heard and what direction are we headed on them? And that will become the focus of subsequent work sessions. So I wanted to just give you a flavor of that way of operating, and that you've done that before with the Portland Plan, so I think it will be somewhat familiar, but that's the course we'll follow.
With that, I guess we'll take questions. Chris?
I have a couple. Didn't want to interrupt the flow as you were going through the presentation. The only time you mentioned zoning code was in respect to the mixed-use project, and I think it was probably confusing to a lot of citizens that revised zoning code is not an output of the comp plan. Could you explain where that happens?
Yeah, back an early slide in the presentation was the 5 steps that the state has us go through to complete this overhaul, and the 5th step is the code part essentially, and so we have what we released today is essentially, as I said, the goals and policies, the map, and the infrastructure plans, but following behind this is a suite of implementation projects, all of which are in some form on our website and several of which have advisory committees going already. For example, the mixed use project or the institutional campus project. They're trailing a few months behind this, so when you're done with providing your recommendation on this, right after it, you'll start chewing through those implementation projects and getting into the code questions. The other thing that your question reminds me of is that there's going to be a lot of confusion between the comp plan map and the zoning map, and that's a similar kind of thing, that the comp plan map is the map of the plan for 2035, the long-term land use plan. The zoning map is what we allow today, and that's what your permit is reviewed against downstairs in the permit center. Those are 2 different maps. They usually relate to one another. They're not 100% in sync because there are some areas where we're not quite ready to have zoning for a particular use, but we want to plan for it. So that's why there's those 2. So you'll hear a lot of testimony about where is this going to go with zoning. And part of that implementation phase that follows is making zoning map changes to bring the zoning map into conformance with the new plan where there's a conflict. And so that's to follow, and we're going to continue to have to remind and educate people about what those two maps are and what we're dealing with right now versus 6 months from now or next year.
Thank you. The other question I had is very specific. You mentioned that we would be designating new town centers as part of this process. Town centers are something that Metro also pays attention to and has a classification for. Is our classification going to match theirs? And if we're adding new ones, will we ask them to add them to their plans?
Yeah, ultimately we have to reconcile the two plans. And so we have also neighborhood centers which sit at a level below what Metro's map is concerned about. So we don't necessarily have to ask Metro to adopt the same designations as long as our plan is generally in conformance. But for the town centers, which is a Metro designation as well, we will be locally deciding what we want to do first, and then based on that, we would bring a proposal to Metro to say we'd like to update the regional plan to reflect what we would like to adopt. And so there'll be a back and forth at that stage.
Thank you.
Other questions? Karen?
Yeah. So, Deborah, I was really fascinated by your immigrant mapping, and I didn't know that that was happening. No, not surprised I didn't know, but because of the work I do, I'm really interested in that. How is the information that you've gathered regarding different demographics of people, especially those that don't speak English as a first language, which we have many in East Portland, how's that going to be presented to us? Because I'm fascinated with the idea of matching that to the zone changes and the different ways of recognizing immigrant populations as part of our overall health and economic development in Portland, how that's going to be a part of what the PSC does.
So I think we're using the information in a couple ways, and some of it I think is going to come directly to you, and I mean, we're happy to share all of it, but one purpose of our mapping is to inform our outreach, to make sure we're reaching the right communities and having conversations with the right interpreters and the right community liaisons. So that's one focus. But I think we're also using that information to do our equity analysis of the map. One of the things that we are doing now, we weren't able to do it before the map was all put together because it was still being put together, but now that we have a proposal, we've asked of one of our consultants, Anita Yap, to do an analysis of what we're proposing to really look through, are there any unintended consequences by mapping things in a certain way or some combination of investment proposals or policies or maps? Is there anything that we might be doing that might inadvertently promote more displacement or might do something else that we hadn't yet anticipated or intended? So that analysis is going to come to you formally, and it's happening while we're hearing testimony from others. That analysis is going on. So that will be brought to you as part of our staff work, and it could indicate that there's some things we might want to rethink based on her analysis that would be brought to you potentially as proposed amendments. So I think that that would be one way where you will see the results of the analysis, not necessarily the analysis itself, but we could certainly share with you what we mapped in terms of languages and communities to see.
Well, because
who
it's
is where.
useful not only to this process,
Mhm.
a lot of us are involved in other equity work
Right,
around the city.
right.
And so, I mean, if we're able to use that information in
Absolutely.
multiple venues that we all sit on different committees and different work groups, I just think that's fascinating information potentially. And the other thing I just wanted to say was I'm really happy in the citywide systems plan. In Chapter 3 under guiding principles, you have quite a bit that is attending to the issues around using an equity lens, looking for like in Lisa Bates's study, issues around gentrification and displacement. And I hear you talking that talk. So I'm excited to see how this will be applicable to the different changes in codes that we do and zoning that we do for this plan.
Mike?
Yeah, Susan, I do remember where I was 30 years ago. I was testifying to the Planning Commission of the City of Portland, as a matter of fact, on some of these very issues. And I would like to say that I actually did get this early enough to, this afternoon, to read through it, and I am really impressed with the work and a huge shift from 1980 with regard to natural resource issues and so forth, which is great. Mike, I do have one concern, but it's kind of down in the weeds, actually, compared to the higher level conversation we're having. I'll just flag it for the commission and ask to work with staff maybe to address some of the issues. I did try it with my iPhone, and one of the first things I saw that was West Hayden Island. The entire West Hayden Island was under the job category, was all blue, and I talked to Eric about it, and he said, well, that's not, legally binding or anything, but from my perspective, in terms of the conversations about West Hayden Island, it caused me a little concern. The other thing was that in the policy 6.41 West Hayden Island, there's not really a reference. It reads to me pretty generic, and we put a huge amount of effort into the package that we developed, and I would like to see if we can't have more of a very explicit reference to our commission's recommendations to the city council in terms of the package as far as mitigation and so forth. So that's something I'd like to chat with staff about to see if we can do that and maybe consider what kind of designation might be, other than what's on it right now, might be appropriate. But I guess that's what I'll just throw that out for now, and want to have a conversation about it. And I'm particularly interested in, the implications. And one of the things, of course, is it's one thing now for how we read it and how the current city council reads it. What about 5 years from now or 10 years from now? That's a major concern I have. And getting to the economic opportunities analysis, we've talked about being more creative about how we're going to meet our job goals in the city. With respect to, say, Central East Side, we had quite a conversation about thinking differently about what industrial jobs are and so forth. And we're still going to run into this Goal 9 issue that we're going to have to address, and I hope we can be really creative about how we talk about making those job goals in maybe different ways than we have in the past. And I'm glad to hear you're on the Port Blue Ribbon Committee, because that brings up another issue. Is the port really thinking more creatively about how they could collaborate with ports downstream on the Columbia River to meet our commodities issues?
No.
So, flag.
Howard?
Well, let me be the first to compliment the staff and Susan for an extremely professional job. You mentioned that you did this in-house without consultants, and I think it demonstrates we don't need consultants in the city if we have this kind of talent. I'm impressed with the computer. The technical side of this, very impressed with, but the whole package is very well done, very professional, and I congratulate you for it.
Other comments? First, I'd just like to reiterate what Howard said. This is some amazing work, and Susan, Eric, Deborah, Kevin, and all the other staff ought to be congratulated for this work. I mean, it's very professional, high quality, and it gives a lot of information to the public about what we're trying to do, what our vision is for the future, and I think it's important that the public's able to see it in a usable form today, and this does that, in my view, and I know it's going to get better, but it's a major first step, and I think we're going to have a lot of comments from the public on this, and that's good, because we need to hear from the public about what they think about our future and the actual implementation of the Portland plan in a comp plan sense. Deborah, just a quick question on the map app, or not map app, but the immigrant maps. You had talked about, and Karen had talked about that. We're going to get that information, or is it available, or?
Yeah, we can put something together to present to you. We were using it as sort of an internal tool, but I would be happy to share it. See, it's
I think
super interesting, and so.
One of the concerns I haven't delved into it, other than to look at West Hayden Island, that was brought to my attention early this morning, but.
Or late last night.
Late last night.
11 p.m. I got a text.
Yeah, as we look through the policies and everything, we've, in the background maps, identified vulnerable communities and communities that were vulnerable. And as we look through the policies, tying those policies together to mitigate some of the housing concerns and some of the, ensure the jobs are being created in the right places, or we've got the focus in the right places. So that's one of my kind of things as I go through it, to look through and to use the word gentrification to see if we've got strategies that mitigate that. I don't think we can stop it, but that do mitigate those in terms of, and get some quality housing in some of those areas, because we do need to grow. With that said, I would tell everybody to take a deep breath now, because it really is, we've got 7 months before we're going to make a decision. So we've got 4 public hearings that people can come to us and provide a lot of testimony. As you heard earlier, you can send us an email, you can call a telephone line, you can send a letter, you can get on the MAP app. You can go to probably neighborhood meetings, there will be discussions there. So there's a lot of ways to get us information, to send us your concerns, what you think of what's proposed before you, and in 7 months, then you can exhale and say, you like it or don't. So, but I think it's, there's a lot of information here. There are changes, and I think there's some strategic directional changes for the city about how we think of the future, in terms of housing, in terms of our growth, and people need to be attentive to those changes and comment. And we do have 4 public hearings, so we've got 4 long nights ahead of us, and so, but that's good. And 2 of those are out in the community, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot of testimony out there. It would be very valuable for us in our decision-making process once we get to the work sessions. And I would encourage all of you not to wait till the last minute and after the public sessions and everything to get your comments in as you read through this. If you have comments, questions, get them to staff early and have them start to look at those issues, and to get your questions answered that may help us, or help you as we go through the public testimony, and the TSP gets rolled into this later down the road. Those are things, if we can get them out early, we'll be better informed as we get into the work session. And so, Mike, you can start writing now.
So I have a question about that then. Procedurally, if we are, I think that the next time that we have a hearing is the 23rd of September. Is that correct?
That's the public hearing, yes.
That's what I'm talking about. So Chair Bob, as we read through this ahead of time and begin to have our questions, the procedure for us to ask staff questions, should we be emailing you the question along with Susan? What's your process?
I think the best way would be to email, in particular, your questions, not for the public broadly, but to email your questions to both Eric and Julie. And if you just want to come and talk, I'm happy to meet with any of you, and we could do that over the next month. So if you have a chance I'd encourage you to, break it up into chunks that work for you, sitting at the beach, wherever you're going on vacation, to begin to pick through this. And as your questions come up, scribble all over the document, group those together, call me up or Eric, or what, if it's about a particular topic, if it's about jobs or housing or stormwater management or whatever the topic, we can pull that person in and have one-on-one. The better educated you are, the better able you'll be to ask really good questions as different members of the public come up. And it would be great if, 2 weeks before the first hearing, you're starting to feel like this is a document that you all own. That would be great.
You'll probably have a couple waves of questions, the first wave before the hearings, but after you've heard from the public for 4 days, you'll have another round of questions.
And I'd encourage you to think about what Mike said earlier about not in today's environment and reading this about, how this current council or how we might think about this, but how are people going to look at and read this, probably 10 years from now or 5 years from now that weren't in this policy group or not on council at the time, and how are they going to interpret it? How is that public going to interpret it at that time? And kind of read through it through that lens and see if it still reads and is intended to do what you think it should be doing, because that's important. The future groups need to somehow feel that they have some ownership as they go forward and that they understand what we intend to be done.
Yeah, just a little wrap up on that is as you're looking at them, the policies in particular, the way the policies are used most are as findings for ordinances. So when we adopt an ordinance, whether it's a financial decision, a zone change, a new program development that we're instigating in, we go back and have to come up with sort of the basis for why we're making this financial decision. And we often go back to the comprehensive plan and we'll use these specific policies and goals as, we said we want, a walkable scale neighborhood, or we said we want, any one of these things related to housing or related, to stormwater or to climate change. And these are the issues that it comes back to. So language is important. You'll see a range of verbs from, promoting to much stronger, striving for something. And I think those verbs are important in terms of how much emphasis and how important are they? Because every single day at council, I think they do look back in history and say, what did we mean by this? And this will especially be relevant in its first 5 to 7 years when it's still fresh, because I think people will see it as more relevant to decision making. As it's gone on over time, the comprehensive plan we adopted in 1980 obviously has had some changes. It's still what we have for the basis for making decisions right now, but I think often things have changed a lot, and so this will especially be an important document, in its first 10 years.
Other questions or comments? Thank you very much. Thank you.
No street changes for 8 months, right?
We're adjourned. Thank you.